She wasn't serious. I know that now. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, and the sky over Kelowna was doing that thing it does in fall. Flat white, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been photographed through a frosted window. I dropped Mia off at school early because she had a science presentation and needed to set up her project. And I remember standing in the parking lot watching her disappear through the doors with her poster board under one arm and thinking, she's getting too big for me to carry that for her anymore. Then I drove to work. I've been a cabinet maker for 17 years. I run a small shop out of a unit in an industrial park on the east side of town. Me, a guy named Pete who's been with me since almost the beginning, and a part-timer named Lou who comes in 3 days a week during busy season. We do custom cabinetry, built-ins, the occasional piece of furniture, kitchens mostly. It's not glamorous, it's dusty and loud, and my lower back has had opinions about my life choices since I turned 42. But I'm good at it. That part I know for certain. The call came in around 9 that morning. Not a number I recognized. A woman's voice, calm and direct, like she was used to people picking up quickly. She said her name was Natalie Renault. She said she'd gotten my name from a friend of a friend, someone whose kitchen I'd done in West Kelowna the previous spring. She said she had a project, a large one, and she wanted to discuss it in person before committing to anyone. I said sure. I asked when worked for her. She said now. I paused for a second. I had a delivery coming at 10 and Pete was already in the shop getting set up for the day. I almost said no. Almost. Where are you? I asked. She gave me an address up in the hills above the lake. I recognized the area. You don't miss those properties if you've lived in Kelowna long enough. Old money, new money, the kind of houses that look like they belong in a magazine that you'd never actually buy, but might flip through in a waiting room. I told her I could be there in 20 minutes. The gate was already open when I pulled up. I drove through and parked in a circular driveway in front of a house that was, I'll say it plainly, one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen built out of wood and glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the lakeside. Cedar siding that had been treated to go silver. A covered entrance with exposed timber beams that I found myself studying before I'd even gotten out of my truck. Whoever had designed this place understood wood. A woman met me at the door. She was maybe 45, though she could have passed for younger. Dark hair pulled back. She was wearing clothes that didn't look expensive but were. I've been around enough to know the difference between expensive that tries to look simple and simple that just is. Hers was the first kind. She looked at my truck, then at me. You're the cabinet maker. I am, I said. Brennan Sloan. She shook my hand, firm, quick. Come in. The inside of the house stopped me cold. Not because of the square footage or the views, though both were considerable. What stopped me was the kitchen, or rather, what had been done to the kitchen. Someone had attempted a renovation. That was clear from the moment I walked in. New upper cabinets had been installed, or started to be installed. 3 runs of them, white shaker style, the kind you can order flat pack if you know where to look. They were up on the walls. But they weren't right. I could see it from 10 feet away. The reveal on the crown molding was wrong. One of the upper runs wasn't level, not just slightly, but noticeably, in a way that would have driven me insane to look at every morning. The cabinet beside the hood vent had been scribed to the wall, but whoever did it hadn't accounted for the wall not being plumb, so there was a gap on the bottom that light was coming through. This was work that someone had been paid for. Probably paid well for, given the address. Nathalie was watching me look. I had someone in to do the kitchen, she said. A contractor. He came very highly recommended by my previous designer. They had an existing relationship. She said that last part the way you say something when what you mean is something else entirely. He started the uppers, invoiced me for the full scope, and then he stopped answering my calls. I walked closer to the cabinet, beside the vent hood. I didn't touch anything yet, I just looked. How long ago? I asked. 6 weeks. Did he finish the lowers at all? He didn't start them. I turned around. Behind me was an island that had clearly been ordered and delivered. It was sitting in the middle of the kitchen on its protective cardboard, still partially wrapped in plastic stretch film. A beautiful piece of work, actually. Thick butcher block top, painted base in a warm sage green, the kind of island that should have been the centerpiece of the room and was instead just sitting there, orphaned. He invoiced for installation of the island too? Yes. I nodded slowly. I didn't say what I was thinking yet. I kept looking. The uppers he did install, I said, "Are they glued in?" "I don't know. Do you have the original paperwork?" "The quote, the scope of work?" She pulled out her phone without a word and forwarded me a PDF. I opened it on my screen. The scope was detailed, suspiciously detailed, actually. The kind of detail that looks thorough on paper but is designed to give a contractor flexibility in interpretation. I'd seen this before. Not often, but I'd seen it. I scrolled through to the pricing. I did the math in my head. I looked up at her. She was watching me with an expression that was hard to read. Somewhere between controlled and exhausted, like someone who has been managing a situation for longer than they'd like and has gotten very good at not showing it. "This quote is about 40% higher than it should be for this scope," I said. "For Kelowna, for this market, for these materials, 40%, maybe more." Something moved across her face. More like confirmation. "That's what I suspected," she said. "Who was the contractor?" She told me the name. I won't write it here, but I knew it. Not personally. I'd never worked with him. Never had reason to. But the name had come up in conversations. The kind of conversations you have in the trades when someone asks you about someone else, and the room gets quiet for half a second before people find other things to say. "I've heard of him," I said carefully. "I imagine you have," Natalie said. And then for the first time a small smile. The kind that's more tired than amused. "He told me he was the best in the valley. He had photos. He had testimonials. He had a 3-month waiting list, apparently, which he graciously moved me up on because of my designer's referral." She paused. "I've since learned that my designer received a finder's fee for referrals to his business." I stood there for a moment. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it, not in a professional way, but in a human way. Because what she was describing wasn't just a bad renovation. It was a system. A small, local, low-stakes version of the kind of system that works because everyone in it has an incentive to not ask questions. "So," she said, and her voice had shifted slightly. Less controlled, just fractionally. "Can you fix it?" I turned back to the cabinets. "I can," I said. "But I need to take one of those uppers down to understand what he used behind the walls. If he glued them, we might have drywall issues. If he just used screws, we're in better shape. I also need to check the level on the second run. If the wall isn't plumb on that side, whoever did the scribing didn't compensate for it, which means it's going to look wrong no matter what we do until we address the wall itself. And the island. The island is fine. It's a good piece. It just needs to go where it's supposed to go." She nodded. Then she said the thing she said. She'd been looking at the island, and I think she was saying it more to herself than to me, or maybe to the situation. The whole frustrating, expensive, avoidable situation. She said, "If someone could just come in here and actually fix this properly, I'd give them anything they asked for." Then she looked at me sideways, and something in her expression shifted into something lighter, dry. "Within reason," she added. "Probably." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was the first genuinely funny thing I'd heard in a while. "I'll settle for my standard rate," I said. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. I went home that night and made Mia dinner. She told me about her science presentation. Her teacher had asked if she'd thought about entering the regional competition, and Mia had said she didn't know, maybe, and I could tell from the way she was eating her pasta that she wanted me to tell her to do it. I told her to do it. She pretended to think about it for a few seconds and then said, "Okay, maybe she would." That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the PDF of that scope still open on my phone. I'd been in this industry for 17 years. I'd built kitchens in homes worth $2 million, and I'd built kitchens in homes worth $200,000. I'd worked with architects who sent 12-page drawings, and homeowners who showed me a picture torn from a magazine. I'd seen good work and I'd seen bad work, and I'd seen work that was technically fine on paper and ethically rotten at its core. This was the last category. The contractor had taken a substantial deposit. He'd installed work he knew wasn't right. I could see from the photos I'd taken that afternoon that the scribing issues weren't oversight. They were shortcuts, the kind you only take if you're planning to move on before anyone looks closely. He'd invoiced for an island installation he never performed, and he'd done all of this through a referral network that gave him cover. Because when the client called to complain, there were 2 other professionals in the loop who had an interest in the story staying manageable. I put my phone down. I thought about Natalie Renault standing in her kitchen looking at that wrapped island. I thought about how she'd said within reason, probably, that little flinch of humor in a situation that wasn't funny. I went back the next morning. Pete held the fort at the shop. I brought my own tools, which I always do, and I brought a level and a moisture meter and my scribing jig, which is a thing I made myself about a decade ago out of a piece of aluminum flat bar and some parts from a hardware store, and which works better than anything I've ever been able to buy. I started by taking down one of the uppers. It was screwed in, not glued. That was the first thing that went right that morning. I found the studs, I found the ledger board he'd used, and I found something else. Behind the cabinet on the drywall, someone had written a measurement in pencil. Just a number, 87.5. I stared at it for a moment. 87.5 is not a standard cabinet height. It's not a number you land on by accident. It's the number you use when the ceiling in a room is not standard height, and you've measured down from the ceiling to find your start point rather than up from the floor, which is, in fact, the right way to do it in a room with an irregular ceiling line. But the cabinets hadn't been installed at 87.5. They'd been installed at a standard 84, scribed from the floor up, which is why the crown molding reveal was wrong, which is why the gap existed at the bottom of the corner cabinet. Whoever had written that number on the wall had known the right measurement and then ignored it. I took a photo of it. I didn't say anything yet. I worked through the morning. I got the first run of uppers repositioned. I had to patch 2 screw holes in the drywall, but the cabinets were solid units, and the boxes themselves were fine, which told me whoever had ordered the materials hadn't cut corners there, just on the installation. By noon I had the first run level, the crown molding reset, the reveal consistent. Natalie appeared in the doorway around 12:30. She was on a call, but she held up a coffee in my direction with a questioning look. I nodded. She came back 5 minutes later with 2 cups, her call finished, and stood beside me looking at the first run. "That looks completely different," she said. "It is completely different," I said. An eighth of an inch in the wrong direction on a reveal line is the difference between something looking right and something looking like it's bothering you and you don't know why. She looked at me. "Is that something you learned or something you just know?" "Both," I said. "You learn it and then eventually it becomes something you just know." She nodded like that made sense to her. We drank coffee. "What did you find behind the cabinet?" she asked. She'd seen me take the photo. I showed her. She looked at the number on the wall, then she looked at me. "He measured it right," she said. Her voice was very even. "Whoever wrote that number did, yes, and then installed it wrong, yes." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I need to make some calls." She left the kitchen. I heard her on the phone in the next room, her voice low and controlled. I went back to work. By the end of the second day, I had all the uppers done. Every run level, every scribe tight, the crown molding continuous and consistent from one end of the kitchen to the other. The island was positioned and secured. It fit the space exactly the way it had been designed to fit it, which told me whoever had laid out the original design had done their job well. I stood back and looked at it. It was a good kitchen. It had always been a good kitchen, underneath what had been done to it. Natalie came in while I was packing up. She stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly, taking it in. "I've been avoiding coming in here," she said. "For 6 weeks I've been walking around this room." "I know," I said. "People do that. When something's wrong with a space, you start navigating around it without realizing." She turned to look at me. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. You have a daughter. You mentioned her this morning, her science project. Mia. She's 11. You're doing this alone?" It wasn't asked with pity. It was asked the way someone asks when they actually want to know. "Her mom and I split up when Mia was 3, I said. "She's in Vancouver now. Mia lives with me full-time." Natalie nodded. She was looking at the island. "My husband and I divorced 4 years ago," she said. "We built this house together. Or started to. He left before the kitchen was finished." A pause. "Which is probably why I was so determined to get it done properly. It was going to be done right, at least." I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right move is to not say anything. "And then," she said, and she almost laughed, "it was done spectacularly wrong." "It's right now," I said. She looked at me. Something in her expression settled. Not quite a smile, more like relief. I packed up my tools. I loaded the truck. I came back in to do a final walkthrough and leave her with the documentation. Before and after photos, notes on what I'd done, a brief write-up on the installation issues I'd found and corrected. I do this for every job, but on this one I made sure it was thorough. She read through it at the kitchen counter while I stood near the door with my jacket on. "This is going into my file for the dispute," she said without looking up. "I figured," I said. She looked up. "Thank you, Brennan. You're welcome." And then, quieter, "I meant what I said the other day, about giving someone anything they asked for." I looked at her for a second. "I know," I said. "I took you at your word. I charged you exactly what this was worth." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she smiled, really smiled, for the first time since I'd met her. That's actually the most refreshing thing anyone said to me in a very long time. I drove home. I picked Mia up from school. She'd heard back. Her teacher had formally submitted her to the regional science competition, and Mia was pretending to be annoyed about it in that way she has when she's actually pleased. I made dinner. We ate at the table. She talked about the competition, and I listened and added things when she needed me to and stayed quiet when she didn't. After she went to bed, I sat for a while in the living room in the dark. I thought about the kitchen, about the pencil number on the drywall, about the difference between knowing what's right and doing what's right, which are not always the same distance apart. My mentor, a man named Roland Fitch, who'd had a shop in Penticton and taught me the trade when I was 19 years old, used to say that wood doesn't lie. He meant it technically. Wood tells you things about itself, its grain and its movement and its history, if you know how to look. But he also meant it the other way. The work either is what it is or it isn't. You can invoice for anything. You can say anything. But the cabinet either sits flush or it doesn't. The reveal is either right or it isn't. The room either feels like itself or it feels like it's been apologized for. I've carried that with me for 17 years. I got a call from Natalie 3 weeks later. She said her lawyer had filed a formal complaint against the contractor with the licensing body, and that the documentation I'd provided had been, in her lawyer's words, unusually thorough and specific. She said it made a difference. She also said she was starting the process of redoing her home office. She worked from home, had been doing so for years, and the space had never really been set up properly for how she actually used it. Shelving, a built-in desk, some cabinets for files. She asked if I was interested. I said yes. We worked together for another 6 weeks after that. She had opinions about how she wanted things to function, which I appreciated. Clients who know what they want are easier to work with than clients who want you to figure it out for them. We disagreed twice on small things. We figured it out both times. Mia came with me one afternoon when school was out, and Pete had things covered at the shop. She sat on a stool and did her homework at the end of the island while I worked, and Natalie came in to make tea and asked Mia about the science competition. Mia answered with more detail than she usually gives adults, which was the first indication I had that she'd already decided she liked her. Natalie's younger sister came for a visit and joined us for lunch one day. Sandwiches from a deli down the hill, eaten at the island, which by then felt like the most natural place in the world to eat. Her sister looked at me, and then at Natalie, and then at me again, with an expression that I pretended not to notice. I noticed. I finished the office on a Friday in early December. The room looked the way good work looks, like it had always been that way, like it was exactly what it was supposed to be from the beginning. Natalie stood in the doorway looking at it for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Roland would have liked this." I went still. I turned around. "How do you know about Roland?" She looked at me. "I looked you up," she said simply. "Your website. There's a section that talks about your background. You mentioned a mentor named Roland Fitch in Penticton." I stood there for a second. "He passed away 2 years ago," I said. "A stroke. He was 68. I'm sorry." And she meant it. I could tell, the same way I'd meant it when I said it to her about the kitchen. "He would have hated that quote," I said after a moment. "The one from that contractor. He would have said the same thing I said, that you can invoice for anything, but the cabinet either sits flush or it doesn't." Natalie looked at me for a long moment. "Is that something he taught you?" "More or less," I said, in his own words. She nodded. She was still looking at me. Then she said quietly, "I think it's the most important thing a person can know about their own work." We stood there in the finished office for a minute, maybe a little longer. I drove home in the dark. The Okanagan in December does something interesting at night. The lake doesn't fully freeze, and on cold, clear evenings the water stays black while everything around it goes white, and the whole valley looks like someone drew a line down the middle of it. Mia was already in bed when I got home. I'd texted the neighbor who watches her when I'm running late, and she'd texted back that everything was fine, that Mia had eaten and done her homework and gone to bed without a fight, which happens about 40% of the time and always feels like a small victory. I stood in the kitchen for a while. Ours is not a beautiful kitchen. The cabinets are 20 years old, and one of the drawer slides needs replacing, and the countertops are a laminate that was already dated when we moved in. It is a kitchen that works because we use it, and because we've learned where everything goes, and because Mia draws things at the table and leaves them there, and I don't move them because I like seeing them. I went and looked at the drawing she'd left out. It was a cross-section of a plant cell, labeled in her careful printing, for the science competition. She'd drawn the mitochondria as little sausage shapes, which is biologically accurate and also, apparently, what 11-year-olds find funny. I taped it to the fridge. I turned off the light.